People keep asking me what the judge did after he finished reading my letter. They want to know if my son wept. He did not. Nathan has never been a man who lets anyone watch him break. He saves that for the car, for the driveway, for the moment the door is shut and there is no one left to perform for. I know this because I raised him, and somewhere along the way he learned the careful half of what I taught and threw the honest half away. What the courtroom saw was worse than weeping. They watched a grown man understand, in the space of 4 short paragraphs, that the father he had described to a room full of strangers as confused, declining, no longer himself, had seen the whole thing coming 11 months before it arrived. They think the letter was my defense. It wasn't. My defense was a doctor, a folder, and a signature. The letter was something else. The letter was the truth I had been keeping for the day my son finally reached for the one thing I had spent my whole life protecting. But I can't start in that courtroom. If I begin there, you'll decide I went to win. I didn't. I went to be measured one last time, in front of someone who couldn't be talked out of the truth with a smile. Welcome to Wise Dad Stories. These are stories about men who were patient and were called weak for it. Men who gave their families every chance to choose decency, and then answered once, quietly, with the truth already in writing. I spent 51 years repairing watches and clocks. In that time, I learned that the strongest force inside a timepiece is the one you never see move. It's the mainspring, coiled tight behind the face, holding all that tension without a sound, letting it out one careful tooth at a time. A man can be built like that too. People look at the quiet and decide it means empty. It usually means loaded. If a story like this one finds something in you, stay with me a while and tell me where you're listening from tonight. I like knowing where the family has gathered. My name is Emmett Cole. I am 71 years old, and until 2 winters ago I opened a narrow shop on Delaney Street 6 mornings a week and fixed the things other people had given up on. Wristwatches, Mantel clocks, a grandfather clock a widow's husband had wound every Sunday for 40 years, right up until the Sunday he couldn't. I do not consider myself a sentimental man, but I have held a great many objects that meant everything to someone, and it teaches you how to handle a thing you cannot replace. I am not a dramatic man either. My wife used to say I could deliver bad news like a weather report. Ruth said that with love, mostly. Ruth and I were married 44 years. She was the warmth in our house. I was the furnace in the basement. Nobody thanks until it's January. She passed 4 years ago this spring, and I will get to what she left me, because it matters more than anything else in this story. For now, you only need to know 2 things about her. She saw people faster than I did, and the last clear thing she ever asked me was to look after our grandson, no matter what our son became. I have a son, Nathan, and a daughter, Diane. Diane lives 3 states away and mostly kept to the edges of what happened, which is its own kind of choice, and I'll leave it there. Nathan lived 20 minutes from me. Nathan is the one this story is about. I need you to understand that I loved being his father. When he was small, he used to sit on the stool beside my bench and watch me work under the loop, and he'd ask why I never got frustrated when a repair fought me. I told him a watch doesn't argue with the man winding it. It just keeps honest time and waits for you to notice. He liked that answer when he was 9. He forgot it by the time he was 40. Here is the part I have never told anyone, and I'm only telling you because it changes everything that comes after. 8 years ago, Nathan's contracting business went under. Not because he was lazy, he worked hard, but because he trusted the wrong partner and signed the wrong papers. And when it collapsed, it took the equity in his house with it. There was a lien. There was a notice taped to his door. He had a wife then, and a boy who was 5 years old, and he did not tell me any of it until the week before they were going to lose the place. I had a watch, a railroad-grade pocket watch my father carried for 40 years on the line, the one he set his whole life by, the one thing of his I had left. It was worth more than most people would guess to look at it. I sold it to a collector in Ohio, and I paid off the lien on my son's house, and I never once told him where the money came from. A father does not hand his child a receipt for love. Nathan kept the house. His marriage didn't survive the following year. But the boy had a roof, and the roof was the promise I'd made to Ruth. Nathan believed a good year had saved him. I let him believe it. That was my choice, and I'd make it again. I tell you that so you understand what kind of father I had been before my son decided what kind of old man I was going to be. It started small. It always does. The first winter after Ruth died, Nathan began correcting me in front of other people. If I paused to find a word and a man of 70 pauses, the words are all still there. They just take a longer road. He'd jump in and finish it. The word. Then glance around the table like he'd caught something. If I misplaced my reading glasses, which were on my head, he'd say, "See, Dad, this is what I mean," to no one in particular. He started reorganizing my shop to make it safer. He moved my calendar into his phone so he could keep track of my appointments. I noticed. I told myself he was grieving his mother in his own clumsy way, and I gave him grace, because grace had always been the cheaper thing to spend than pride. That was my first mistake. Not the grace, the silence about the grace. By the second year, it wasn't clumsy anymore. It was a story he was telling, and he was telling it to other people before he ever told it to me. There was a Saturday that fall I have not been able to set down. A woman named Delphine had brought in her mother's mantel clock for a cleaning, a piece I'd serviced for 20 years. When she came to collect it, she paused at the counter and asked, gently, if it was true I was winding the shop down. She'd heard I wasn't well. She said it the way you say a thing you've been told by someone you trust. I asked her who'd told her. She said Nathan had, over at the hardware store, said his father was slowing down and the family was starting to make arrangements. I kept my hands flat on the counter so they wouldn't do anything I'd regret. I told her the clock was ready, that it kept perfect time, and so did I. She laughed, a little unsure, and left. I stood there a long while after, listening to a dozen movements tick on the wall, every one of them keeping better time than the story my son was telling about me. I did not call him. That was the grace again. And the silence again. The trigger, if you want to call it that, came at Sam's 13th birthday dinner. Sam is my grandson, Nathan's boy, the one Ruth made me promise to watch. He is quiet and too polite for his own good, and he notices everything, which is a hard way to be 13. We were all at Nathan's house, the house I had quietly kept over his head, though he didn't know it. There was cake on the counter and the good plates out, and I remember the clock on Nathan's mantel was 4 minutes slow, because I always know. Halfway through dinner, Nathan set down his fork, cleared his throat like a man about to make a toast, and handed a blue folder across the table to Diane, and another to his cousin, and kept one for himself. On the tab, in his own handwriting, it said Dad's care plan. He said he'd been noticing some things. He said he'd spoken with a doctor and looked into some options. He said the shop was probably too much for me now, and the house too, and that he thought it was time somebody stepped in before something happens. He used the word episodes. He said it gently, the way you'd talk about a man who wasn't in the room. But I was in the room. I was 6 feet away with a fork in my hand. I want you to sit with that for a moment. Not the cruelty. Cruelty I could have understood. It was the tenderness he wrapped it in. He didn't say, "You're useless, old man." He said, "Dad, I'm only trying to protect you from embarrassing yourself." He said it soft and warm, and it cut deeper than any shout, because it was designed to sound like love to everyone else at that table. I looked at Sam. My grandson wasn't confused, and he wasn't amused. He was ashamed, and he was the only person there who had done nothing wrong. I did not raise my voice. I have never believed a man grows taller by making his family feel small. I folded my napkin, set it beside my plate, and asked one question. I asked, "Nathan, what does the doctor's name happen to be?" He didn't have it ready. A man who has actually taken his father to a doctor has the name on his tongue. Nathan had a pause instead, and in that pause, I understood something that turned the whole evening cold. This wasn't concern that had gotten ahead of him. This was a plan he'd already started, and the dinner was just the part where he needed the rest of the family nodding along. That was the first time I saw it clearly. He didn't want to help me manage my affairs. He wanted my affairs. The shop, the accounts, The house he thought was his but wasn't. All of it. And the fastest, cleanest, most respectable way to take everything from a man while still looking like the good son was not to fight me for it. It was to convince a court that I wasn't home anymore, that I was gone behind my own eyes, and somebody kind had to step in. He wanted to be made my guardian. He wanted a judge to sign a piece of paper that said Emmett Cole can no longer be trusted with Emmett Cole, and once that paper existed, he wouldn't have to take anything. It would simply, quietly, become his to manage. I drove home that night. I remember the road was wet and the shop signs smeared in the windshield, and I remember I was not angry. I want to be honest about that, because you'd expect anger, and there wasn't much. What I felt was something closer to grief, the kind you feel at a funeral for a person still walking around. I sat at my kitchen table a long time. There was a photograph of Ruth on the sill, the one from the lake, and I looked at it the way you look at someone when you need them to tell you that you're not crazy. And she had told me, in her way, a long time before. Near the end, when she was too weak to do much but watch, she saw Nathan through the kitchen window helping himself to a look at the deed box in the garage, thinking no one was home. She didn't cry about it. She just took my hand and said, "Emmett, love him all you want, but don't ever mistake his charm for his character. Protect the boy from what his father is becoming, not from his father." I had thought that was the fever talking. Sitting at that table 4 years later, with a folder in my son's handwriting fresh in my memory, I understood she had seen the whole clock before the first gear ever turned. She always did read people faster than I read movements. And here is the thing my son never understood about the quiet men. We are not slow, we are early. Because I had already seen the shape of this coming, not the exact day, but the shape. 11 months before that birthday dinner, back when the corrections were still small, back when I was still telling myself it was grief I had done something, I hadn't told anyone. Ruth's warning had stayed with me, and I had learned across 51 years that when a mechanism starts to slip, you don't wait for it to fail in front of a customer. You test it while there's still time to be sure. So 11 months earlier, I had driven 2 hours to a hospital where no one knew my son, and I had asked for a full workup, a real one, not a 5-minute "what year is it" in a doctor's office. 2 days of it, a neuropsychologist, the long paper tests, the memory batteries, the whole careful measure of a man's mind. I did it precisely because I could feel the story my son was starting to tell, and I wanted the truth on the record before he could write his own version of it. The results were clean, not merely passable, clean. The doctor, a patient woman named Dr. Okafor, told me my cognition was well within normal range for my age, and asked me, kindly, why a man in my shape had come all that way to be tested. I told her I fixed things for a living, and I liked to know a mechanism was sound before I trusted it with something valuable. She laughed. Then she signed her report, and I had it notarized, and I put it in a folder, and I gave that folder to a lawyer named Marilyn Frost, with one instruction: hold this. And if anyone ever questions whether I'm in my right mind, this is your answer. I did not do that to be clever. I did it the way I'd oil a movement before it's seized. Slow, early, quiet. The strongest force in the watch is the one you never see move. The petition came 6 weeks after the birthday dinner. A man in a gray jacket handed me an envelope on my own front step, apologized like it wasn't his fault, which it wasn't, and left. Inside was my son's sworn statement asking the court to appoint him guardian and conservator of the person and estate of Emmett Cole, alleging that I was no longer capable of managing my own affairs. He had a doctor's note attached. I read it twice. It was based on a single office visit I now remembered Nathan had brought me in for my blood pressure, and a hurried physician had spent 9 minutes with me and checked a box. 9 minutes against 2 days, a checked box against a signed battery of tests. My son had built his whole case on the hope that no one would ever bother to look closer. Marilyn came to the shop the next morning. She set her briefcase on my bench, beside the loop and the little dish of screws, and told me we could settle it fast, the moment we entered Dr. Okafor's report. The petition would collapse, and the whole thing could be over in a hallway outside a courtroom. I told her I didn't want it settled in a hallway. My son had made his accusation in front of the family. I wanted the answer made in front of a judge, because a boundary spoken at a kitchen table can be argued with, and one entered into the record cannot. Then I gave her the first instruction, and it had nothing to do with the hearing. 3 years earlier, Nathan had talked me into signing a durable power of attorney, just in case, back when I still trusted those words in his mouth. I told Marilyn to revoke it, that day, before anything else. She had the papers filed by the afternoon, and as of that afternoon my son held no legal authority over a single thing of mine, and never would again. He didn't know it yet. He would find out the way you find out a spring has already let go, not when it happens, but the next time you reach for something and nothing turns. Then I told her about the letter. The hearing was on a Tuesday, the 12th, at 9 in the morning, in a courtroom that smelled like old wood and floor wax, and the coffee somebody keeps in a back room. Nathan sat at his table in a good suit with his lawyer, and he did not look at me. Sam was in the second row, because his father had brought him, I think to soften the picture, a devoted family, worried about Grandpa. Sam looked at me the whole time. I want you to remember he was there. Nathan's lawyer went first. He was smooth. He talked about decline and safety and the difficult decisions loving families have to make. He entered the 9-minute doctor's note. He said the words only trying to protect him twice, and each time I heard my son's voice underneath, at the dinner table, handing out folders. Then it was our turn. Marilyn stood, and she did not raise her voice. She moved to admit one document, Dr. Okafor's full evaluation, signed, notarized, dated 11 months before my son ever filed a thing. The court admitted it. She asked that the findings be read, and the judge read the summary line himself. Normal cognition, no evidence of dementia or impairment, fully capable of managing his own affairs. I watched the smoothness go out of the other lawyer. I watched my son's jaw work. Then Marilyn told the court the respondent wished to enter a sworn statement, a letter I had written, dated and notarized the same week as the evaluation, sealed and held by counsel since, to be opened only if my competence was ever challenged in a court of law. She moved to admit it, and the court admitted it into the record. The judge, his name was Alcott, an older man with reading glasses on a chain, asked whether I wished to read my own statement aloud. I said I'd rather he did. A man reading his own letter can always be accused of performing. Let it come from the bench, I said, where no one could claim I'd made my face do the work. So Judge Alcott put on his glasses, and in a room gone very quiet, he read my letter into the record. I won't give you all of it, but I'll give you the bones, because you've earned them. It said, if you are reading this, then someone has come to this court to say I have lost my mind. I want the court to know I anticipated this the way I anticipate a spring wearing thin, not because I am bitter, but because it is my trade to notice strain before it snaps. I am of sound mind. The enclosed evaluation proves it, but I did not write this letter to prove I am well. I wrote it to say what a courtroom might not otherwise hear. 8 years ago, I sold the one thing my own father left me, a watch he carried 40 years, to pay off the lien on the house my son was about to lose. I never told him. I let him believe a good year had saved him. I would make that choice again today. I say it now, in this record, not to shame him, but so that this court understands the ledger runs the other way from what has been claimed. I have never taken from my son. I have only ever given, quietly, and let him keep the pride of not knowing. I made a promise to my late wife to protect our grandson no matter what our son became. I have kept it. It is already done, in writing, and it cannot be reached by this petition or any like it. I am not a bitter man. I am a patient one. There is a difference, and I have spent my life proving it. Judge Alcott set the letter down. He took his glasses off. He looked at Nathan for what felt like a long time and did not say anything unkind, because he didn't need to. Then he dismissed the petition from the bench and found that no evidence of incapacity existed, and he said one more thing before he rose. He looked at me and he said, "Mr. Cole, you keep better records than most attorneys I know." I said, It's the trade, Your Honor. You learn to write things down before they're needed. That was the loudest my justice ever got. A judge's quiet sentence, and a room full of people understanding it at once. But not all of my justice waited for the judge. Some of it had already moved, and my son felt it later, one piece at a time. The power of attorney was the first tooth of the spring, and it had let go days before the hearing ever started. He simply hadn't reached for anything yet. The rest came after. By Wednesday, the day after the dismissal, I stopped the quiet payments. For 8 years I had been covering the property taxes on Nathan's house through an account he never saw, because the promise I'd made to Ruth was about the roof over Sam, not about my son's comfort. I did not take his house. I couldn't, and I wouldn't. I simply stopped paying for a thing he had spent a dinner telling a court I was too addled to understand I owned. Let him carry his own roof now. He is a grown man. By the end of that month, the rest of it came clear to him, and this was the piece that landed hardest, because it had been true the whole time, and he'd never once thought to check. The estate he had gone to court to control was already beyond his reach. 2 years earlier, quietly, I had placed the shop and the house and the bulk of what Ruth and I built into a trust, not for Nathan, for Sam, held for him until he turns 25, so that no one, not his father, not anyone can spend it, borrow against it, or talk him out of it, while he's too young to know better. There is a smaller endowment beside it, a scholarship in Ruth's name, for kids who want to learn a trade with their hands the way I did. My son had spent months and a great deal of the family's goodwill fighting for the keys to a house that had already been signed, in careful ink, into safer hands. He was never in the will he was trying to seize. He'd been guarding an empty safe and calling it an inheritance. The first proof he could hold in his hand reached him on a Thursday, taped to his own front door. A county notice, pale yellow, with the perforated edge that always tears crooked. Delinquent property tax. He told me later he read it 3 times on the step, the way you read a word that won't come into focus. He did not know that the same door had worn the same kind of notice 8 years before, or that I had been the one who quietly took it down. He only knew that something he had counted on without ever once naming it had stopped a thing that had always held, and now didn't. A week after that, Nathan came to the shop. He stood in the doorway where the bell still rings, and for the first time in 2 years, he didn't have a folder, or a plan, or a soft, cruel sentence ready. He just looked tired. He asked me how I could do this to family, and I told him the truest thing I know. I said, "Nathan, I love you. I have loved you since before you could hold your own head up, and I will love you the day they put me in the ground. But love and access are not the same thing. You went to a court to take my name away from me. A man can forgive that. He does not have to fund it. Resemble." He didn't answer. He looked at the bench, at the loop and the little dish of screws, at the stool where he used to sit when he was 9 and I was the whole world to him. Then he left, and the bell rang once behind him, and that was that. Sam still comes to the shop. He came the Saturday after all of it, on his own, and he sat on the old stool without being asked, and he watched me set a mainspring the way his father used to. After a while he said, quietly, "Grandpa, I didn't know about any of it. The trust, the watch, the house." I told him he wasn't supposed to. I told him that's the whole point of the quiet things, you carry them so the people you love don't have to. And I told him what his grandmother made me promise, and that keeping it had been the easiest promise of my life. He asked me if I was angry at his dad. I thought about it, because he deserved a real answer, not a comfortable one. I said, "No, I'm not angry. I'm decided. Those aren't the same either." I told him, "A door isn't the same as a wall." I told him his father knows where I am, and the light on the porch still comes on at dusk, the way it always has, and if the day ever comes that Nathan wants to be the man his mother believed he could be, he'll find the porch lit and the coffee on, but he'll come as a son, not as a plan. That part isn't negotiable anymore. There's a line in Ruth's last letter to me, the private one, the one no judge will ever read. She wrote it near the end, when she could still hold a pen. She wrote, "Protect the boy, Emmett, and keep your heart open, even when you have to close your hands." That's what I did. I closed my hands. I kept my heart open. I don't think there's a wiser thing a man can do with the years he's got left. People ask me if I felt powerful, standing there while a judge read my own words back to a courtroom. I didn't. I felt like a watchmaker who'd finished a long repair and finally heard the mechanism tick true again. No triumph in it. Just the quiet satisfaction of a thing set right, and running honest, and keeping better time than the people who thought they could stop it. A wise father doesn't need to raise his voice when the truth already carries his signature. He winds the spring early, in the quiet, where no one thinks to look, and he lets the record finish the sentence. He was too dignified to shout. Now tell me honestly, was I too hard on my son, or not hard enough? I read every comment, and I want to hear where you land. And if this story reminded you of someone who mistook a quiet man's kindness for permission, subscribe to Wise Dad Stories. There is always another quiet truth waiting to be wound and told.